Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
I've worked at the same plant long enough to know the sound of a forklift by driver. The way Tony pops the clutch when he's rushing. The long, unhurried whine on night shift when the younger guys are saving their backs. 30 years gives you a lot of useless trivia like that. It also gives you a decent pension, a drawer full of old name badges, and a reputation for being the guy who knows where the shut-off valve is when things get too loud. I never expected a party. My plan for the 30th year was to shake hands with the foreman, maybe get a certificate mounted crooked in a frame, and go home to a steak if the grill cooperated. But my wife, Melissa, is a planner. She makes lists on legal pads and then makes lists of the lists. I should have figured something was coming when she borrowed my old suit from the dry cleaner and kept suggesting I just trust the calendar notification she'd put on my phone. "Dress decent," she said the Thursday before, kissing my cheek like a waitress pulling off a good tip. "No grease-stained polos. Something with buttons." "Buttons," I said. "You drive a hard bargain." Our kids, grown enough to have opinions about wine but not mortgages, were in on it, I could tell. Jake kept pretending he didn't know how to use the group chat, and Sadie asked me twice what shoe size I wear, which is not a question you ask by accident. My mother-in-law, Frances, called to ask if there was a tie color I felt emotionally attached to. My father-in-law, Ray, texted me a thumbs up and then sent "proud of you" 3 times in a row, each its own text bubble, like he was tapping out the beat of a song only he could hear. The venue was the banquet room at the American Legion, which smells like coffee and old floor wax and a little like the war. Melissa had strung lights across the ceiling, and there were pictures on foam boards, me young and squinting beside a machine, me with Jake in a stroller outside the plant on a Sunday open house, me and Mel in matching t-shirts at some company picnic where someone had thought 3-legged races were a good idea. The tables had centerpieces that looked like someone had tried to make ears out of paper. Our friends from church came, and the neighbors who borrow ladders and sugar, and the guys from my line who have only ever seen me in steel-toe boots. There was a microphone. I should have known then that microphones are trouble. People said nice things. Our pastor told a short story about seeing me at dawn once in January clearing the church steps because the custodian had the flu. My supervisor, Denise, who is not a crier, got soft around the eyes and said she never had to check a gauge if I said it was in range. Jake made a slideshow that had the good kind of embarrassing photos in it, me asleep on the couch with a newspaper on my chest, me in a sweater Melissa insists on calling cranberry even though it is red. Melissa spoke last. She's good at rooms. She knows how to let silence be quiet instead of empty. 30 years is a long time to do anything, she said, hand on the mic like it had been made for her prom. Richard has done it without asking for applause. He's the steady in our family. She looked at me the way she looked at me when we were 23 and didn't know how hard everything would be. He is stubborn about the right things. Everyone clapped. I swallowed and smiled and tried not to think about how sweat finds you under a suit no matter how slow you move. The trouble started after the speeches, which is when trouble likes to start, when the wine has done the softening and the cake has been cut and people are so sure the night is safe they stop guarding it. He was a younger guy from accounting, maybe 30, trim beard that looked like a choice, not a compromise. He had that tall confidence some men carry like a jacket they never had to buy. I didn't know his name. I knew his type, numbers, meetings, coffee orders too complicated to be patriotic. He took the mic for a toast, because nobody had been guarding it and apparently he needed to practice. To Richard, he said, drawing out my name like a question, who makes the rest of us look lazy. People chuckled, because it sounded like a compliment and we were trying to be generous. He had already had one too many. His consonants were softening. And to Melissa, he continued, turning his grin into something that a young man mistakes for charm, too, rumor has it, could have taught HR a thing or two about conflict resolution, if you know what I mean. Right, guys? There's a way a room changes temperature all at once. Not colder or hotter, just different. He laughed at his own sentence, then glanced around to catch up to the effect it had. Realized he was off script, and doubled down, which is what men do when they mistake laughter for wind at their back. I mean, come on, everybody knew, right? Johnny from accounting? He looked toward the table where a cluster of young staff sat, faces flushing, chairs pushing back just an inch. She's a legend. My old man brain took a half beat to make the math work. At the table to my right, Denise's eyes went granite. My son went still in that particular masculine stillness that is 30% anger and 70% trying not to make a scene that becomes the rest of your life. Sadie's hand found my forearm and squeezed with the pressure of a lifeguard grabbing a wrist. Melissa, my wife, stood near the cake, one hand on the knife, a posture so ironic it would have made a cartoonist rich. Her smile drained out of her like someone opened a valve. She didn't put the knife down right away. That tiny delay is the kind of thing your brain replays later when you're unkind to yourself. "Hey," Denise said, stepping toward the mic like a bouncer. "Not the time." The guy, God help him, laughed into the microphone like he had just nailed the part where you name the groom wrong in a rom-com. "What? It's a joke. Everybody knows. Johnny Johnson?" He gestured to the back, fishing for the old rumor like he was sure it would be his lifeline. This was, like, years ago. Years ago does not mean a thing is not in the room with you. Years ago can be right now, if you say the wrong sentence into a cheap sound system. Frances stood, not a thing she does often. Her mouth made a perfect O, the kind you blow when the cake has trick candles. "Stop," she said. It didn't carry. She was speaking to a different decade. Ray put a hand on my shoulder like he was steadying me for a photograph. He squeezed once, not soft. "I'm here," he said, "just for me." Melissa put the knife down, carefully, like the edge was a living thing that could decide to be unkind. She walked to the microphone. The room did that thing where everyone looks down and then back up, like they can't help watching the slow-motion accident and can't stand to watch you see it. "Please give me the microphone," Melissa said to the young man. She didn't snatch. She asked, and when he hesitated, she looked him in the eye in the way school principals have perfected. He let go. She turned to the room, to me, to our kids, to the cluster of coworkers who had come to say thanks for my stubborn years. "I am so sorry," she said, and the mic made it sound bigger than she meant. "This is not the place, and it's not the time, but I made choices years ago I'm not proud of. I told myself they were private. That was a lie. They were never private. I'm sorry." She put the microphone on the table and stepped back like it had heat. The silence wasn't angry. Not yet. It was stunned. Something sacred had skidded and left a mark. The young man stammered. I'm sorry, He looked for a supervisor, found Denise's face, and knew to sit down before he ended his career in 3 sentences or less. I felt my hands on the edge of the table, my fingers white where they pressed. I've always considered myself a slow burn man, the kind who takes a night to know how he feels and a week to say it. But something about the way Jake and Sadie were looking at me made a different part of me stand up and choose. "We're going to take a break," I said to the room, the way a teacher says it to a class that just watched someone faint. "There's coffee in the hallway. People love directions in a crisis. We'll regroup in 15. Denise caught my eye and nodded, the nod of a person grateful someone else found the floor. Our pastor's wife herded people toward the door with muffins like they were sheep. The band made a show of checking cables they had already checked. I turned to my kids. "We step outside," I said. "Now." We walked out behind the building where the smokers pretend they're alone. The air had that strange banquet hall chill that follows you through a door, smelling like stale beer and expectations. Jake kept his hands in his pockets like he was hiding something there he couldn't break. Sadie crossed her arms and uncrossed them, then put both hands in her hair like she needed to keep her head from floating away. "Years ago?" Jake asked, flat. "What is years ago?" Melissa met our eyes one at a time, like she knew not to try to embrace us all at once. "Before Sadie left for college," she said. "It was brief. It was stupid. It was everything you label things when you want to believe you're not the kind of person who does them. I told myself your father didn't need another problem on top of long shifts and bills. I told myself I could keep our family intact by making sure no one ever knew. That was arrogant. I am sorry." "You told yourself a story," Sadie said. She looks like her mother and sometimes I think that is why their fights sound like mirrors. Melissa nodded. "I did. I will answer questions. I will not ask any of you to decide anything tonight." Ray stepped out the door like he'd been waiting to see if I needed company in the losses department. He looked at Melissa and didn't flinch. "Richard is a good man," he said to her, which is the kindest indictment. "I'm going to speak plain. I'm with him." He put a hand on my back, heavy and certain. Frances came next, breathless with that particular kind of dignity the old try to maintain when the young break rules. "This is not the time," she said, eyes flashing at Melissa. "This is your husband's night." "It was never going to be the right time," Melissa said, and there was a strange relief in her voice that made me mad. Like confession had stolen something back from shame. I wanted to rage. I wanted to go find Johnny from accounting, middle-aged, probably, and grayer now, and not nearly as interesting as the version that's been living in my head since a minute ago, and tell him to keep my name and my wife's out of his mouth for the rest of his bored life. I wanted to call the young man with the mic a dozen names and ask Denise to fire him before dessert. I wanted to pick up the microphone and say, "We are not this." But then Jake touched my sleeve like a man pulling another man back from a curb, and I realized the only person I needed to talk to was the one we'd promised things to when we were young and pretty and had no clue. "Mel," I said. "We'll go home. You'll be in the guest room. Monday we call a counselor. You give me your phone and your passwords, not because I want to be a detective but because I need to know there aren't any haunted closets left in this house. We tell the truth to the extent the kids want to know it. We don't make them parent us. We don't perform grief for the neighbors." She nodded, immediate, like she had written those exact sentences in a notebook and had been waiting for me to read them out loud. "Yes," she said. "All of that." "Tonight," I said, "we're going to walk back in there, and I'm going to thank people for showing up, and then we're going to end early. I am not going to let the last 30 years get turned into a punch line by a kid who thinks work is a brand." Jake snorted despite himself. Sadie let out a breath she'd been hoarding. Melissa put a hand over her mouth and didn't cry, which for her is more meaningful than crying. We went back in. Denise had found the mic and, blessedly, unplugged it. People were lingering by the coffee urn, talking in those huddles you get at weddings when the couple is late to their own reception. Our pastor intercepted me and squeezed my shoulder in that pastoral way that says he is not going to make me pray in a circle right here but he wants me to know he's thinking about it. "Friends," I said, loud enough to get people to turn but not loud enough to bounce off the ceiling. "Thank you for being here. I'm grateful. We're going to wrap a little early. There's cake to take home. If you brought a casserole, God bless you, and if you didn't, God bless you anyway. 30 years is a long time. Life is longer. We'll see you soon." People clapped like they clap at the end of a recital when a kid has forgotten the middle but found the last note. They hugged us. Some avoided eye contact because they didn't know where to put their eyes. A few of the old hands from the line slapped my back and said "hell of a run," which felt like the right sentence from the right mouths. Denise found the young accountant and told him he could go home and that HR would be emailing him Monday. He looked like someone had finally told him the joke never had a chance. Back at the house, it was quiet in the way kitchens are when you take the leftovers out of the foil. Jake poured coffee instead of beer. Sadie put cake slices in Ziplocs like we were prepping for a storm. Frances sat and then stood and then sat again. Ray took out the trash without asking where the bags were, which touched me more than a sonnet would have. We talked logistics because logistics are merciful. Guest room made up. Melissa's sister could take Frances for the night if needed. Ray would swing by Monday morning to help me change the lock on the back door that's been sticky since Easter. I texted Denise and told her thank you, that I'd be in Tuesday, that we could talk then. She sent back, "Proud of how you handled a bad moment. We've got you." It did something to my shoulders I didn't expect. Around 10, Jake asked if I wanted him to stay over. I told him no. That I needed the house to learn how to sound with fewer hearts in it for a night. He hugged me and did that thing where men slap each other's backs like we're trying to shake loose coins. Sadie hugged me and whisper promised to call in the morning with a dumb story on purpose. They left. Frances kissed my cheek and told me to sleep with a glass of water by the bed like I was 8. Ray and I stood in the doorway an extra beat and didn't say anything else because we had already said enough. He drove them home. Melissa stood by the sink, ring still on, fingers whirring at it in circles. "I will show up," she said. Not a plea. A promise. Whatever it looks like. I will show up. "Okay," I said. The word carried weight. I will show up too. Not as a martyr. As a man who gets to be angry and decent at the same time. She nodded. "Okay." I slept in the guest room with the window cracked because I needed a noise that wasn't my own thinking. At 2 a.m. I woke up and checked the doors and then checked them again. At 3, I made a list on an index card because lists are how I prove to myself I'm still driving. Counselor, HR follow-up, talk to kids separately, tell Ray thank you, get the back door lock, pick up Sadie's dry cleaning because she'll forget, put the certificate from the plant somewhere that isn't a shrine. Sunday morning, the house smelled like coffee and church clothes we weren't going to wear. Melissa made eggs because her hands needed something to do. I took the plate. We ate in the quiet people mistake for peace. Jake called at 9 with a story about a wrong number text that asked him how much he charged to clean gutters. He said he replied depends on the gutters and then got into a 10-minute conversation with a stranger about the ethics of tipping. I laughed more than the story earned. Sadie sent a picture of a dog she'd seen on her walk and wrote, "Look at this idiot," which is the way our family says I love you without getting sentimental. By noon, I had a counselor's appointment on the calendar for Thursday. The receptionist had the voice of a woman who keeps plants alive. "We'll start with you alone," she said. "Then together. Then, if your adult children want, with them." She asked if there was anything she should know. I gave her the facts, not the adjectives. At 2, I drove to the plant and stood in the parking lot, engine off, listening to the buzz of a place that has been the soundtrack of my adult life. The forklift inside whined the way Tony's does when he's trying to finish the last run before he clocks out. A gull landed on the lamppost and looked down at me like a critic. I thought about 30 years of showing up, about grease under my nails and the way my back learned to tell the weather, about how love shows up in casseroles and unlocks you change for someone else. Back home, I found the certificate from the party in the bag of stuff Melissa had packed to decorate the Legion Hall. I took it out. It had my name, spelled right, and the dates, and the plant's logo embossed like a good seal. I didn't hang it up. I slid it into the drawer with the batteries and the screwdriver and the takeout menus we pretend we won't use again. I'll find a place for it later, when the story it tells isn't trying to compete with the other one. That night, I sat on the back steps with a beer and watched the sun do its bored trick of making the same street look new for 10 minutes. Melissa came out and sat one step lower. We didn't touch. We did not touch. We listened to a neighbor argue mildly about recycling and to a kid practicing trumpet with a bravery that deserved better than his tone. If you want to know what I learned, I can give you the list I'm adding to the index card in my wallet. Don't let a kid with a microphone tell your story. If you've been lied to, you still get to decide what kind of man you are on the day after. People will surprise you in both directions. Assume decency, but keep the spare key to your backbone. 30 years of work matters. So does the work you start on year 31. When you're offered help, lasagna, a lock change, an appointment, take it. Don't build a monument to the worst sentence you ever heard. Put it in a drawer. Look at it when you're strong. Then close the drawer again. Tomorrow, I'll go back to the plant. I'll listen to the forklifts and know which one is Tony's. I'll check the gauge without looking and tell the new kid which shut-off valve to use if the line screams. I'll clock out and buy a new lock for the back door and a plant for the kitchen because the last one died when we forgot to water it and I want to see if we can do better. Melissa will call the counselor's office to set her own appointments. We will talk to Jake and Sadie with questions instead of instructions. Francis will bring soup like soup can glue a thing. Ray will show up Wednesday with a toolbox and beer we won't drink until the screw is tightened. And at some point, when a young guy at work lifts a glass and thinks a joke is a good idea, I'll remember that the real miracle of a life isn't that it doesn't break. It's that sometimes, when it does, you get to decide how you put it back together, with better glue, with different hands, with the humble knowledge that parties end and work starts again in the morning. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.